All right, so now we're going to implement Redux. Now, Redux is used for most of the same reasons the context API is used, and that's for app level state management. Now, you already have an idea of how this works. You can think of app level state as kind of like a cloud that is above our components and the rest of our application, and things are sent down from the state through the reducer, and things are sent up through actions. So if we want to add a new log, that's going to go ahead and call an action, and then that will dispatch to the reducer, and the reducer will decide how to manipulate the rest of the application, the rest of the components in the UI. All right, so it's the same idea, it's just set up a little differently. It has a little bit more boilerplate because we have to create our store and all that stuff. But I think, in my own opinion, and this just varies between developers, I think Redux is better for really large applications. I think the structure of it is a little better. But I think context is great for small and medium-sized applications. All right, so, I mean, that's just my opinion, but, you know, you'll come to have your own after you learn this stuff, if you don't already. So let's go ahead and install what we need to for Redux. So I'm going to go into my terminal that I have running, which is just my standard Mac terminal here, and I'm going to stop the server because there's a bunch of things that we need to install. So let's clear this up, and let's say npm install. So first thing is going to be Redux itself. Now, Redux is a state management library. It has nothing to do with React itself. What we use to implement React with Redux is a package called React-Redux. Okay, that's what allows us to connect the two together, and they work really well together. So in addition to that, we're going to use something called Redux-Thunk, which is a piece of middleware for Redux. It basically allows us to make asynchronous functions inside of our actions so that we can, for instance, wait for a response to come back and then dispatch to our reducer. I'll explain more about that later. And then we're also going to be using the Redux dev tools for Chrome. And in order to implement those, in order to use that, you actually have to add a bit of code. And there's an extension that helps us do that in a cleaner way. And that's called Redux-DevTools-extension. So we're going to also add that. And I'm pretty sure that's all we need. So let's go ahead and run that and install that stuff. And then the next step is to create our Redux store, which is pretty much just a bunch of boilerplate. Most of the store files you create are going to look very similar. So let's go ahead and run our server now with, what do we do, npm run dev, which will run the backend and the front end. So JSON server and React. Okay, so let's head back into our file structure here. And like I said, the first thing that we're going to do is create a store, and that's going to go in our source. Everything is going to go in our source code here, source folder. So in here, let's create not a folder, but a file called store.js. And inside our store, we're going to import some stuff from Redux. So we want to import create store, which is responsible for actually creating our store. Since we're using the Thunk middleware, we also want to bring in apply middleware. And that's going to be from Redux itself. Okay, now we're also using the DevTools extension, so we're going to say import, and we're going to bring in something called compose with dev uppercase T tools, and we're going to bring that in from Redux-DevTools extension. And just to show you real quick, if we go to our app, and you should have the Redux DevTools already installed, by the way, but if I go to look at them, it says, no store found, make sure you follow these instructions. Now, if you click on this, it'll show you what to add. Basically, when we do our create store, you would add this. However, we're using the extension, so it'll look a little cleaner than this. Okay. But you have to actually implement that in order to use the Redux DevTools, because it has to basically access your store. All right, so back to that file, we also want to bring in thunk since we're using that as middleware. So we're going to say import thunk from Redux thunk. And we're going to import our root reducer. Now we haven't created that yet, but we're just going to bring it in. And that's going to be from, we're going to have a folder called reducers and then a file called index.js, and that's what we want to import. So we can just simply do /reducers, which doesn't exist yet. And the way that reducers work in Redux is we have a root reducer, and then any other reducer, like let's say our log reducer, our tech reducer, or anything else, we just bring them into that root, and then we bring that into this file. Now we also have initial state, so initial app level state, which we're just going to set to an empty object. And then for middleware, what I usually do is just create a variable, and any middleware we're going to use, put inside here, which we just have thunk, so just an array of middleware, and then we create our store. And we do that with the create store that we brought in. Okay, and this takes in a couple things. It takes in, first of all, the root reducer. Needs to know which reducers you're working with. And then the initial state. And then any middleware. Now, since we're using thunk, which is in this middleware array, we're also using the dev tools. That's where this compose with dev tools comes in. So we can actually just say compose with dev tools, and then we can pass in apply middleware, which we brought in from Redux, and then just simply pass in the spread operator with that middleware array. So it will add our thunk middleware. It'll also add the whole DevTools functionality. And that's it. And then finally, we just need to export as default our store. And we shouldn't have to touch this file again. Now, in order to implement the store, to use it, we have to go to our app.js. Remember when we dealt with context, we had to basically wrap our entire thing here, our entire application, with whatever context it was, the GitHub context, the contact context, whatever. With Redux, we have this one centralized store, and we'll have all of our actions and reducers basically attached to this store. So that's all we need to wrap it with. We don't have to keep adding different contexts. And that's one reason why I think it's great for really large applications. So let's bring the store in. Actually, there's two things we need to bring in. We need to bring in something called the provider, which is what we actually wrap it with, and that is from React Redux. Remember I said React Redux is what is responsible for actually connecting them. This allows us to provide our app level Redux state to React. And we're also going to import the store from ./store. Okay, and then all we have to do is take that provider and wrap this entire thing. So you can see the similarities between what we did with context, and then this provider actually takes in the store, which we'll just pass in like that. Now, doing that, let's see. So it's going to say can't resolve reducers, because basically we're inserting a root reducer in our store that doesn't exist. So in our source folder, let's create a folder called reducers. And inside reducers, let's create a file called index.js. So this is going to be our root reducer. And the idea is, like I said, we just bring in any other reducers we have, and we're able to do that with something called combine reducers. So we're going to bring that in, combine reducers, and that's going to be from Redux. Okay, and then we're going to go down here and just export default combine reducers, and then what happens is it takes an object with all of your reducers, which we don't have any right now, but I'm just going to save that, and it should I spelled combine reducers wrong. Okay, so it should at least get rid of that error. Spelled it wrong here too. Okay, so now now that we have our store implemented, there's nothing in it. There's no reducers, actions, or anything like that. But it should, at least our app should work, and so should the Redux tools, which you can see over here. Okay, so if we look at our console, we should see nothing but that silly date warning. What's this? Store does not have valid reducer. All right, so I mean, this is fine for now because we need to create a reducer. We don't have one yet. We'll do that next, but everything should be all set as far as our store file and our provider and also our Redux tools. Now, as far as the tools go, what happens is every time we fire off an action, like let's say we delete a log, we click that, it calls a delete action. That'll show here. It'll actually show the type that's getting sent to the reducer. Also, it's going to show our entire state down here. So it'll show the entire state tree, and any difference whenever you update, like if I click delete, if there's any difference in the state that's sent down from the reducer, that's going to show here. So the Redux tools are incredible, and I've said this in many different videos, courses. I couldn't imagine using Redux without using these dev tools. And there's a lot of other stuff you can do here as well, testing, stuff like that. All right, so in the next video, we're going to start to work on logs. Okay, I want to be able to fetch logs from the back end and add logs and all that stuff. So we're going to need some actions, types, and reducers. All right, so we'll start that in the next video.